Hong Kong, 1999. Police walk into an apartment and find something that'll give them nightmares forever. A decomposing head stuffed inside a Hello Kitty doll. This was the end of Fan Man-yee, a young mom who dared to steal from the wrong person. And if her 3 monster killers hadn't forced a 14-year-old girl to watch, perhaps Fan would have remained undiscovered forever. This case, and the 2 others we're about to discuss, had veteran detectives crying. But they also had people outraged. Why does the system keep failing the vulnerable? Here are 3 stories that will make your blood boil. These poor people deserved better than to be destroyed, dismembered, and left in boxes or dolls. Trigger warning though. This video discusses topics including violence, abuse, and systemic neglect. They called him the reading man, Warren Barnes, a gentle soul who could always be found outside a local bridal shop in Grand Junction, Colorado. If you wished him a good day, he'd always respond with a warm, "And you also." It's this small detail, this tiny act of kindness, that makes what happened to him all the more devastating.
Is it okay if I do a demonstration?
Oh, yeah.
This is him. I was straddled on top of him like this.
Okay.
And he couldn't fight back. It was actually surprisingly easy. I was barely breaking the sweat.
His killer chose him because he thought no one would miss an old homeless person. But Brian Coey couldn't have been more wrong. Warren Barnes was beloved. He was seen. He mattered. But this story isn't just about Warren's tragic end. It's about how a 19-year-old descended into darkness while everyone watched. How every safety net designed to catch troubled youth had holes big enough for Brian to fall through. From early childhood, Brian Coey's path toward violence was marked by glaring red flags that somehow went unseen, or worse, ignored. As a toddler, he displayed unusual behaviors. By age 5, he had an ADHD diagnosis. Later came autism spectrum disorder and depression. But diagnoses alone don't tell the whole story. Throughout his school years, Brian's fascination with violence set off alarm bells. He'd make inappropriate comments, revel in dark interests, dress as Jeffrey Dahmer for Halloween. His teachers saw it. They reported their concerns, warning that Brian could be a potential threat. But their words evaporated into the bureaucratic void. He created a kill kit, a backpack filled with weapons and tools. When his parents discovered it, they simply made him throw it away. No therapy, no intervention, no real conversation about the darkness growing inside their son. Meanwhile, Brian retreated further into his bedroom, his online searches becoming a roadmap to tragedy. Murder, body disposal, serial killers, and the list only gets darker. The digital breadcrumbs of what was to come were there for anyone paying attention, but no one was, or perhaps they didn't want to see. Then came that fatal night in February 2021. Brian, fresh out of high school with a new car, decided it was time to act on his violent urges. He drove around looking for a victim and found Warren Barnes sleeping under a bridge. What followed was an act of violence so brutal, it's hard to talk about it, to think of the pain and terror Warren felt during his last moments on this earth. The next day, trying to dispose of evidence, Brian got his car stuck in the Colorado River.
Please stay in the car, yeah. All right? Well, you're not hurt, right? You're okay?
No, just a little cold is all.
Just beside your pride a little bit?
And probably $7,000.
When police arrived to help, they noticed blood on the trunk.
You can probably see it from here. It's a lot of red on the back of that, dripping down it all a little bit. A lot of red, which means looks like blood.
Blood?
Yeah.
Even then, the system failed. They accepted his weak explanation, fake blood for a Halloween party, and moved on. Warren Barnes lay undiscovered while his killer went home to his family. It was Brian's mother who finally broke the case. She found Warren's head in Brian's closet. Brian had tried to throw the rest of his body in the river, but he wanted to keep a trophy and watch it decompose. He was proud of himself. Here's the ironic gut punch. Terry Cohey ran a daycare out of her home, the kind of place parents trusted with their babies' lives. So imagine the absolute horror when she found Warren's remains in her son's closet and had to calmly call those same parents to pick up their kids early, all while making sure Brian didn't bolt before cops showed up.
It was the night of February 27th. It was a full moon. And I figured, I can see so well, why not drive out? And I am in a bad state of mind at that time. I have major depressive disorder, so I am not thinking positively.
Okay.
During his interrogation, Brian displayed a chilling lack of empathy, even excitement as he described his actions. He blamed depression, used mental health as a shield, but the detectives saw through it. This wasn't about mental illness. Plenty of people struggle with depression without turning to violence. This was something darker.
So I go up, and as I'm looking, I see a large thing wrapped in a canvas.
Okay.
And I'm like, that's a homeless person. So I grab my knife, I put on 3 layers of gloves, because plastic gloves can betray their users because they're so thin, those vinyl gloves, by imprinting your fingerprints through.
Brian volunteered to reenact the crime inside the interrogation room, and he seemed to take great pleasure in it.
He was panicking at first in his old man voice. He was in his 50s. I know why I call him an old man. He was saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Why? Ah!" And I just kept on patting his neck. And during the time I was growling and making animalistic noises.
But why were you doing that?
I suppose it was a frenzy.
Okay.
I was so excited, so rushed up on adrenaline and everything.
When the truth emerged about Warren Barnes, the community's response was overwhelming. He was far from the invisible man Brian thought he was. In fact, the Grand Junction community loved him. The bridal shop where he read had set out a special chair just for him. He was known for his reliability at odd jobs, his gentle nature, his love of books. They built a memorial sculpture where he used to sit, ensuring his presence would continue to touch lives even after he was gone. His sister Geraldine said, "He was a man who was loved by the community and family. Nothing can replace Warren. But hopefully, Brian Cohey can never, ever have a chance to hurt someone else." The case sparked crucial conversations about mental health, warning signs, and societal responsibility. Brian's parents, especially his mother Terry, struggled to reconcile the son they knew with his horrific actions. But their story raises uncomfortable questions about parental denial and responsibility. How many warning signs can you ignore before that ignorance becomes culpability? In February 2023, Brian Cohey received his much-awaited sentence.
On the 15th day of the People vs. Cohey, Brian Cohey Jr. is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, including another 13 and a half years.
But the sentence doesn't erase the systemic failures that led to this point. Every missed intervention, every ignored warning sign, every moment someone chose not to act, they all formed links in a chain that led to that brutal night under the bridge. Today, books and flowers blow in the wind at the sight of Warren's death, but his real memorial lives in the hearts of a community that refused to let him be forgotten, that stood up and said, "This man mattered. He was one of us, and his story deserves to be told." For 65 years, he was known only as the boy in the box, America's unknown child. A small body discovered in a JCPenney bassinet box on a cold February morning in 1957, dumped in a desolate field in Philadelphia. For decades, his identity remained one of the city's most haunting mysteries. Today, we finally know his name, Joseph Augustus Celli. He was just 4 years old. But Joseph wasn't just a mystery to be solved. He was a child who should have been playing with toys, not lying in a cardboard box. He was someone's son, possibly someone's brother. He should have been starting kindergarten that year, learning his ABCs, making friends. Instead, his short life ended in unimaginable horror. Picture that February morning in 1957. The first person to discover Joseph didn't even report it. He convinced himself the small body was just a doll. The second witness waited a full day before contacting authorities. Why? He didn't want to get involved. When police finally arrived at the scene on Susquehanna Road, what they found was devastating. Joseph lay naked, wrapped in a cheap cotton blanket, his small body bearing the marks of severe abuse. Stuff we can't even describe here. His hair had been roughly cut after death, as if someone was trying to make him unrecognizable. He weighed just 30 pounds, severely undernourished for a 4-year-old. The city of Philadelphia refused to let this child remain unnamed. They printed 400,000 flyers with his photo, sent his fingerprints to all surrounding hospitals, and kept his body at the morgue while visitors from 10 different states came trying to identify him. The American Medical Association distributed his description nationwide, but for 65 years, there was nothing but silence. That silence was finally broken in 2022 through the relentless work of genealogists and forensic scientists.
Until today, he's only been known as the boy in the box, a cold case that has stumped investigators for 65 years. An unidentified child found naked and beaten to death in a cardboard box on February 25, 1957 in Philadelphia.
The breakthrough came after multiple exhumations and DNA analyses, using technology that didn't exist when Joseph was first found. It took 2.5 years and 3 attempts just to extract usable DNA from his remains. It's a heartwarming thought that people born after Joseph refused to let his case go cold.
His very short life, it was apparent that this child experienced horrors that no one should ever be subjected to.
Here's the wild thing about Joseph's case. It haunted people, like really haunted them. One investigator and medical examiner, Remington Bristow, went full obsession mode for 36 years. This man spent his own money chasing leads. He even carried around a mask of Joseph's face in his briefcase, desperately hoping someone would recognize it. The investigation got intense. They tried everything: psychics, door-to-door searches, following up on foster homes. One detective, Tom Augustine, was just 11 when he first heard about the case. It stuck with him so hard that he made it his life's mission to solve it. That's the kind of grip this little boy's story had on people. But here's where science comes in clutch. They had to dig up Joseph's body multiple times for DNA testing. The samples were trash, seriously degraded after all those years. But these scientists weren't giving up.
The body had been exhumed twice for DNA, but advances in science and technology allowed investigators to gather more critical information that led to the boy's identity.
It took them 3 tries over 2.5 years just to get enough DNA for testing. DNA genealogy is solving cases left and right these days. Basically, they take that DNA and compare it to these massive databases of people who've done those ancestry tests. That's how they finally cracked it, found some distant relatives, and worked their way back to Joseph.
My role was to take the very badly degraded DNA and try to develop data from it that we could use for genealogy.
Still, there's so much we don't know. Who hurt him? Why didn't anyone look for him? The cops have theories, but they're keeping quiet while they investigate, and that's fair. Joseph deserves real justice, not just theories. For 65 years, his gravestone just said, "Bless this unknown boy." Think about that. This kid had a name, a birthday, favorite toys and foods, and things that made him laugh. But all anyone knew him as was this tragic mystery, this unnamed victim. Not anymore, though. Now he's Joseph Augustus Celli. He was born on January 13th, 1953. He was a real kid who should have been playing with friends and going to school and growing up. Instead, someone treated him like he was nothing, like he didn't matter. But he did matter. He still matters. That's why his case is still open.
We have our suspicions as to who may be responsible, but it would be irresponsible of me to share these suspicions as this remains an active and ongoing criminal investigation.
That's why detectives are still investigating. Because no child should ever end up like Joseph did. Beaten, abandoned, unnamed. His story isn't just some cold case file anymore. It's a wake-up call, a reminder that every victim has a name, a story, a life that was stolen. And maybe, if we remember that, we can stop it from happening again. This stomach-turning story rocked Hong Kong to its core in 1999. Then, the rest of the world, because so many people could relate to the essence of it. The brutal reality of how society's most vulnerable are left to fend for themselves in a world that seems designed to break them. This is Fan Man-yee's story, a young woman who fought against impossible odds, only to meet an end so horrific it still haunts investigators decades later. Imagine being born into a world where nobody wants you, no gentle hands to hold you, no soft voice to soothe your cries, no one to protect you from the harsh realities of life. That was Fan's existence from her first breath. Born in the mid-70s into crushing poverty, her parents made an unthinkable choice. They abandoned her at an all-girls orphanage, leaving her to face the world alone. But this wasn't some nurturing haven. The orphanage was a cold, institutional machine where order trumped compassion, where discipline replaced love. The staff treated these vulnerable children like inconveniences to be managed, rather than young lives to be nurtured. Fan never learned basic life skills. Then came the ultimate betrayal. At 15, they threw her onto the streets. The orphanage's cold calculation? They needed her bed for younger children. Imagine being that age, standing on a Hong Kong street corner with nothing but the clothes on your back, no education, no support, no hope. The very system meant to protect her had just sentenced her to a life of desperation. In that desperate world, survival meant making impossible choices. Fan turned to sex work, her young body becoming a commodity in Hong Kong's ruthless underground economy. She fell into addiction, not because she was weak, but because sometimes numbing the pain is the only way to survive another day. Every sunrise brought another battle, just to exist in a society that had deemed her disposable before she could even understand why. But then came a glimmer of hope, a chance at the love she'd been denied her entire life. In the mid-90s, Fan found someone who seemed to care. They got married. In 1996, she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. For the first time in her life, Fan had something pure and real, a tiny hand to hold, a reason to fight for a better tomorrow. And fight she did. With fierce determination, Fan took a job at a nightclub, struggling to break free from addiction's grip, doing everything in her power to create a life worthy of her son. Enter Chan Man-lok, not as a savior, but as a demon wearing a customer's mask. A pimp, a drug dealer, a triad boss. He represented everything Fan was desperately trying to escape. But with a 1-year-old son crying for food and addiction's shadows creeping back, Fan made a fatal choice. She took his wallet, 4,000 Hong Kong dollars, 500 US dollars. That's all it took to sign Fan's death warrant. Man-Lock didn't just want his money back. He wanted to destroy her very existence, to make her suffering a warning to others who might dare to challenge his authority. What followed at 31 Granville Road defies human comprehension. For an entire month, Man-Lock and his 2 accomplices, Leung Shing-cho and Leung Wai-lun, subjected Fan to tortures that would shock even the most hardened investigators. The plan was to keep her prisoner there and invite fellow gangsters to SA her and pay them the money she had stolen from them. If you think that's cruel, it got much worse. These 3 monsters discovered they actually enjoyed tormenting her by their own hands, and when she started looking like a rag doll more than a human being, and other gangsters started commenting, they stopped inviting people. They beat her with iron rods until her bones shattered. They burned her hands and feet until she couldn't walk or defend herself. They cut her with electric wires over and over again. They even forced a 14-year-old girl to participate in their sadistic games, creating yet another victim in their wake. Fan's last moments came on April 15, 1999. She died alone in a filthy bathroom, her body already beginning to decompose while her heart still beat. But even in death, she found no peace. These monsters desecrated her body in ways that defy description, culminating in the grotesque act that would give this case its infamous name, hiding her skull inside a Hello Kitty doll, a final mockery of innocence. The true horror of Fan's story isn't just in its violent end, it's in the systematic failures that paved her path to that terrible apartment. Every step of her life presented an opportunity for intervention, a chance for society to prove it valued her existence. The poverty that forced her parents' abandonment, the orphanage that failed to prepare her for life, the absence of support for homeless teens. The case might have remained forever unsolved, if not for a 14-year-old girl's haunting. Ah Fong, herself a victim of Man-Lock's predatory manipulation, walked into the Yau Ma Tei police station in May 1999, trembling and desperate. She wasn't there to confess. She was there because Fan's ghost wouldn't leave her alone. The ghost's face was unrecognizable from torture, its body riddled with electrical burns, its presence a constant reminder of the horrors Ah Fong had witnessed and been forced to participate in. The officers initially laughed her off, treating her like some attention-seeking kid. But Ah Fong insisted. She couldn't sleep at night. Only when they threatened to call her parents did she break down and reveal the full, horrifying truth. She hadn't just seen Fan's murder. Man-Lock had forced her to take part in the torture, creating a cycle of trauma that would echo through 2 generations of vulnerable women. Another girl forced to grow up too fast in a world that offered no protection. When Justice Peter Nguyen finally heard the case, he said, "Never in Hong Kong in recent years has a court heard of such cruelty, depravity, callousness, brutality, and viciousness." The 3 perpetrators received life sentences. But what is justice in a case like this? Can any punishment restore a mother to her child? Can any verdict heal the wounds of a system that repeatedly fails its most vulnerable? The building at 31 Granville Road no longer stands, replaced by a hotel that erases all traces of the atrocities committed within its walls. But we cannot, must not, allow Fan's story to be buried with it. Her tragedy should fuel our rage against systemic injustice. It should compel us to question how we treat society's most vulnerable. It should drive us to demand change. You guys, thanks for watching. These are tough stories that make us confront the worst parts of humanity. Leave a thoughtful comment to honor the victims discussed today, and before you go, make sure you click those like and subscribe buttons. See you soon. Stay safe.